Diets aren't meant to be long-term. It is not a long-term solution. It is a quick fix. That is what diets are supposed to do. This is how, the diet industry makes billions and billions of dollars. They come up with new quick fixes all the time. But the problem with diets is that they teach us to go right for the nutrition. They teach us to go right for the exercise. And most of us, because we have enough willpower, we can get through any kind of short diet, can willpower our way through it. But what happens when the diet ends? Right? What happens with the diet ends? Well, for most of us, we go back to our real life, maybe not right out the gates, but eventually we can fall back into old patterns, old thought beliefs, old habits. And what happens is the weight comes back.
Do you guys know how difficult it is to find a high quality supplement line that doesn't just destroy your gut? Most pre-workouts and post-workouts, or even like on-the-go snack options like beef jerky or protein bars, they're terrible for your gut health. They're full of xanthan gum and guar gums and fillers and artificial sweeteners, which disrupt your gut microbiome and lead to chronic bloating, constipation, diarrhea, and not to mention when our gut is off, all of the other symptoms like hormone imbalances, thyroid issues, mental health issues, which is why I'm just obsessed about gut health. But anywho, I have not been able to find a good supplement line out there, and I had to cut out all of these fitness type supplements when I was really struggling with a lot of my own gut issues. Until recently, I found Paleo Valley. And Paleo Valley is one of the first supplement companies that hands down is incredible for your gut health, whether you're on a gut healing journey or you're someone who just wants to optimize your gut health and overall health. Their founder, Autumn, actually suffered with IBS herself. So she created this entire supplement line specifically to be gut friendly. And I'm not lying with you guys. Their whey protein powder, which is grass-fed and finished, gum-free, artificial sweetener-free, no issues, no bloating, no constipation, no diarrhea, no upset stomach, which is literally like the first time in my entire life that I've not had issues with a protein powder. And they even have super yummy grass-fed and finished beef jerky sticks, which are made with a collagen casing instead of the typical citric acid casing, which is terrible for your gut health. And if you want to try out some of their other products, they even have a bone broth protein powder. I love adding that into whether it's like my oatmeal in the morning or my protein shakes. It literally tastes like the Nestle hot chocolate powders, if you ever had those as a kid, which were not gut friendly. And then they have great supplements too, like their apple cider vinegar capsules or even their turmeric capsules, which are great for inflammation and gut health. So if you want to get a discount, you can use my code using the link in the show notes here, which is paleovalley.com/Rachel Scheer podcast. But all of that's going to be in the show notes. So check out the supplement line because guys, you know me, I would not have this on my podcast if it was not awesome and gut friendly.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Scheer Madness. Today I have Amber Shaw joining me on the show today. You guys are going to love today's episode because I just love everything that Amber is about on healing your relationship with food, creating sustainable weight loss. So I know you guys are going to take so much out of today's show. Amber, thank you for coming on.
Oh my gosh, Rachel, thank you so much for having me. I feel like we're fast friends since we just wrapped up
Fast
my show.
friends.
Fast friends, girl. I'm so pumped to be here. Thank you.
For everyone who's listening, we actually just did a double podcast. So I am now having her on my show, but I went on her podcast right before this. So we've had a fun afternoon here together, nerding out on all things nutrition and health. So it's been awesome. And you guys get to sit in on it and have some fun here with us. So I'm going to jump right in it today, Amber. What inspired you to specialize in helping people heal their relationships with food and achieve more sustainable weight loss? Because there's a lot of different information out there, right, about diets that people should be doing. What's the best diet? Keto, paleo, Whole30. And a lot of people struggle with staying on these diets. So what got you into kind of this side of health and nutrition?
Yeah, I love that. And so much like your story, my coaching and my practice and my now profession it was born out of my own pain and my own struggles with my relationship with food and body image and just basically being on a diet my entire life. It started for me when I was about 9 years old. And I can remember feeling at 9 years old that I was not in the right body. And I didn't mean that I had an identity crisis or anything like that, but it was more so that I felt like my body wasn't good enough. And there started this worthiness story that I created for myself. And in fact, you said something on my show today that really resonated with me that actually, to be quite honest with you, I think it's going to be a topic of at my next therapist appointment, because you had mentioned that you had tied your worthiness to your body as because of some of the struggles you had went through with your family dynamics. And my parents divorced at about when I was about 7 years old. And I'm just now as an adult unpacking the traumas from that I really never recognized until I became an adult. And I really do think that is part of it, because I, at a very young age, attached my worth to my physical body. And this also stemmed from, I had female figures in my life who it was no big deal to make comments to me about what size I was, about maybe needing to go on a diet, about, whatever it was. And at 9 years old, those were very traumatic statements that were made to me. And I'm super close with my mom and my aunts and grandmas and all of that. And so, but they didn't know back then, right? This was in the era. I mean, I'm 44 years old. This was in the era when it was, constantly stepping on a scale, constantly talking about how fat you are and how much weight you need to lose, and just all of it. And so for me, this is a theme of my life that really just followed me for most of my life. And when I was 15 years old, I started my first calorie restricted diet. I didn't even know what a calorie was. I mean, like, literally, I can just remember going to Subway and being like, I want the veggie sub. And literally I chose that because it was the lowest calorie sub on the menu. I was an athlete, and a track runner, and a cheerleader, and all the things. And so I definitely wasn't feeling my body the way that I should, even at that young age. And this really did progress into my 20s. I became bulimic. I was so terrified I had so much of my identity and my value and my worth wrapped up in the way that I looked and how I looked to other people, and getting that attention, that I really took it to the extreme to make sure that, that wouldn't stop, to make sure that I continued to receive that validation. And I became so fearful that I would lose it that, I was actively, sticking my finger down my throat and binging and doing all the things. And I was a very, very sad person. And fortunately, I had the means and the support to get help with the bulimia. But looking back, I healed myself of the physical part of it, but I did not heal myself of the mental part of it. I was still so obsessed with my body and making sure that, I was, losing weight and chasing and all the things. And so then you fast forward to in my 30s, I had two children, and I gained about 65, 70 pounds with both pregnancies. And that is an unhealthy amount of weight to gain. And so I was preeclamptic with my first. I was on bed rest. And it's really because I used both of my pregnancies as pretty much a full-on binge session. We were talking about on our episode, kind of having that hustle mentality, that all or nothing, that perfectionist, that to me has been one of my biggest strengths, but it's also been one of the such a dark side to me. And so, when I spent my entire life just constantly being obsessed with food, I used my pregnancy as a much needed letdown period. And so I was just eating everything in sight. And so, I had both babies. I lost the weight in a very unhealthy way. I mean, I wasn't bulimic. I wasn't practicing, bulimia again, but I was just, my eating disorder mentality and those tendencies were coming up for me again. And then right around when I was getting ready to turn 40. But I will say, that way of life and that mentality was so second nature to me at that point. I'd been living like that and being so body obsessed, and constant, exercising and, just over the top for so long that I didn't know any other way. And right when I was turning 40, it was right before my 40th birthday. And I always say from the outside looking in, it looked like I had the perfect life. I was married to a super attractive, super successful attorney. He had been my best friend since I was 7 years old. We grew up together. We were the perfect couple. I had 2 beautiful, healthy children. I was crushing it in my sales career. I was making multiple 6 figures. I could do it in my sleep. And so from the outside looking in, everything was perfect. But from the inside looking out, my life was falling apart. I was in a very, very traumatic and painful part in my marriage. My marriage was crumbling for sure. I was so dissatisfied with my job. I knew in my core that I was meant for so much more, but I felt stuck because I was making so much money and it was a career I built and I didn't want to walk away from that. And then ultimately, though, I was also just very unhappy with myself. And I was tired of being unhappy with myself. And so I ended up I decided for my 40th birthday, I had originally planned that I was going to go on basically like a hot girls gone wild trip to like Cancun with like my girlfriends, right? Like that was what I was supposed to do. But I really, right around this time, I began a very much needed spiritual journey and just healing myself and really trying to figure out like how, and really trying to like wade through all this pain I was going through, particularly with my marriage. And so I decided to take a trip to Costa Rica on a yoga retreat for my 40th birthday. And I went with the intention of trying to just figure out, what are my next steps, particularly when it comes to my career. I knew that I wanted to do something else. And so I went and I had a very, very impactful and just life-changing meditation session on the beach. And I just was asking Spirit, like, what's my next move? Why am I here? Like, how can I turn all of this pain into purpose? And I asking Spirit, what do I do? And I just heard the word coach. And it was so, if you're listening to this and you've ever had those moments where you literally just, without a shadow of a doubt, like, that is like divine intervention. You just don't even question it. You feel it in your bones. Right. And that was that moment for me. And I was like, yeah, okay, I don't know what this means, but like, and I came back to Atlanta and I prayed on it and I meditated on it. And I really just felt that God was calling me to really dive into the nutrition and the fitness and to help other women through this. But at that time I was terrified because I wasn't healed. I was in the middle of like my own, I still dieting like crazy, still like I was still doing all the things, but I just trusted that maybe I could also heal myself throughout my, education and then use that in my experience to be able to help other women. And that's exactly what I did. I came back and I enrolled in a year-long integrated nutrition program. And along the way, I continue to work on myself and I continue to heal myself. And I really started to dive into integrative nutrition and using food as medicine and really understanding what that looked like and starting to let go of all of this, calories in, calories out, BS that I was so programmed for most of my life and just taking a different approach. And that's really what led me then and I felt very called to work with women and serve other women. And that's really what led me to my practice.
Yeah. I love your story. And there's so many little pieces. I'm like, oh, I want to dive into all of these rabbit holes with it all. But one, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that. And I do think it takes sharing our story to really help other people open up and to begin their healing and their awakening process. And you said something that was super interesting. You said, first you healed from the physical, and then later you had to heal from more of the spiritual, the internal side of everything. And, that's a lot of what I look at with functional medicine. People come and they're like, there's physically these symptoms, there's physically these things that are wrong. And even Western medicine, we we label people, right? And I'm sure you were even given a label. You were given, you could say body dysmorphia disorder. You could say you have, bulimia disorder. You have, there's all these disorders that we give people out there, and we give them this label and we put them in a box, and we don't really ask the questions of like, okay, where is this really coming from? And we did talk about this on your podcast, but it comes from that internal place of like, where are we really putting our worth in? And if it's in anything that is outside of us, right, it tends to crumble. So, maybe we work with a therapist, and then we learn habits to quit the bulimia, and, these different things that, yes, they help maybe on the physical side, but that true root cause and that addiction that's there, right? Because there's always this addiction that we have, and it can be the addiction of pleasing other people, the addiction of, caring what people think, the addiction to food, the addiction to how we look, the addiction to achievement. Like, we have all of these addictions that really distract and fulfill that ego part. And people always think ego just means like superficial, but I believe like ego means identity, right?
Yeah.
Ego is identity. It's how we're identifying with ourselves. And the ego wants to remain in this, like, wants to feel like it has this sense of worth, and anything that we feel like takes away from our worth, or the ego believes when there's a diminishment of self in any way, then it's going to achieve, it's going to, it's going to binge on the food or whatever it may be able to do to get a sense of identity, even if that identity isn't always a good identity, right? It can be, I have a poor identity in myself. But what I'm hearing is from you, and I know I'm going into a rabbit hole about all of this, but I love these kind of talks.
Yeah.
But, you healed the physical, right?
Yeah.
You healed the body part. And it really took you like really digging deep and healing more so that spiritual side with yourself. I'm curious as to what that work kind of consisted of, because I know you said you were meditating, you're sitting on the beach, and you had that knowing, which I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like that knowing, there's just certainty. This is where you're supposed to go. It comes in those moments. There's no hesitation. You're like, yes, this makes sense. This is what I'm doing. 100% all in. And that's the most incredible. I think that's us coming from that place of being, like that inner intuition place.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, to answer your question of like, what did that healing modality look like? And, it really started with just getting quiet, getting quiet with myself. Right? Like, I think for so many of us, particularly women, whether or not you have children or not, like, it's just particularly women. I think we are naturally, caregivers. We're naturally fixers. We are naturally women that want to help. Like, and so what that can look like at the end of the day is that we are constantly pouring out energetically. We are constantly, listening to other people's, intaking other people's messages, and, and all of that. But we know we don't really create the space. So much of the time, we don't create the space to really hear our own voice. And I am one that does believe that our intuition is our direct source to spirit. I mean, I do believe that when we can get quiet and really listen to what we are feeling and what our inner thoughts are, that does open up the pathway for some, I think, divine intervention. And so for me, it was really just getting quiet. It was just shutting down all the noise. And I got to tell you what, if you are listening to this and you're somebody who struggles to make time, one of the most powerful questions and very, very simple questions in this practice of reconnecting with yourself is simply sitting and closing your eyes and asking the question, how am I today? How am I today? And asking it, and you have to ask a few times, because you have to break free the normal knee-jerk reaction that we give, the rote response that we give everybody, which is, I'm fine. I'm fine. We even tend to do it to ourselves. I'm fine. I'm fine. No, really. How are you today? And if you really get quiet with yourself and you ask yourself that, and you really allow yourself to ask, how are you today? 9 times out of 10, I cry doing that, right?
Yeah.
Like, because I cry because it's like, yeah, right. Because it's like, damn, I haven't checked in with myself. And so for me, as a part of really reconnecting with myself, healing myself spiritually, it also involved too, getting in touch with what are some of those those traumas that I experienced as a child. My parents divorcing, my, aunts and uncles. Gabby Bernstein talks about, big T's and little T's, right? Like big traumas, small traumas. Like, I realized that yes, divorce is a big trauma. It's very easy for us to, I think, we can very easily identify big traumas in our life, but what we don't realize is that these small traumas can have just as much of an impact, but they are dangerous too, because they can fly under the radar unless you allow yourself to do that inner work. And so I spent some time really leaning into what are some of those small traumas, right? So, traumas like, I remember an aunt saying something to me about, me being a size of my body. And that took some digging to remember, but I was like, yeah, damn, that from that moment on, I can remember that was a very, very pivotal, that was a memory that was seared in my brain. So I think that those two things combined, right? Getting still and quiet with myself, that was a big part of it. And then allowing myself to be open and vulnerable to doing some of that past work to make some connections. And what I want to say too quickly about making connections, I think it doesn't, just because you make connections, that doesn't have to define who you are. That doesn't have to be your story, right? But what it helped for me to identify those connections is because I think oftentimes when we get into a rut, and this goes along, I think, with just, anytime you're trying to make change, and you feel like I work with, when I went women who are trying to lose weight and they're struggling, it's like, anytime you're trying to make change and you feel like you're in a rut, you could get really hard on yourself, right? It's our knee-jerk reaction as women to beat ourselves up. Let's say, you ate the cookie and you felt like you shouldn't have, right? What do? You beat yourself up, right? Or you said something you shouldn't have, you beat yourself up. This is what we do. And so I will say that for me, the benefit of doing the work of figuring out those small traumas and those big traumas, it allowed me for the first time in my life to have a sense of compassion for myself, to really understand, like, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. Like, this is why. Oh, that's why. Okay. Now let me heal that. Right.
That's so powerful, seriously. And I think we're identifying too, like you talk about, like, where did this come from? Like those little T traumas. I know what's helped me a lot is just identifying where I formed these agreements with myself early on in life, where these illusions were created. Meaning where, maybe you're someone who watched your mama like point out, another lady's weight, and you're like, man, look at her, look how fat she looks in that. And even though it wasn't about you in that moment, you made this neural connection of, in order for me to be loved and have worth, I need to be small. And this agreement was made in that moment. And that has now carried with you for the rest of your life. So where I do think it's powerful is, just like you said, not getting attached to that this is like who I am. And oh my gosh, like I am what happened to me, which is why I'm big on saying like the trauma, not my trauma even too. So like this happened, but really what happened is I created an agreement with myself as to how I need to show up in order to feel love. And I think when we know that, we're like, okay, that's why. And it's not real. It's not real. It's an illusion that we've created. So I just wanted to point that out because that's incredibly powerful. And number two, you mentioned getting quiet. And I want to highlight what you said there, because that's also very powerful, of getting quiet. And I know a lot of people are listening and thinking that, okay, I just get quiet. And yes, you're asking yourself like those questions and getting very real and vulnerable with yourself, where when most of us stop the doing and we start the being, right? We're a human being, and we spend a lot of the time in the human part and not a whole lot of time in the being part. And when we can really get into being, what is being? Being is presence, being quiet, and we can really like be here in this moment. That's where we're no longer in that ego. And we're really here now. And that's actually truly like who we are, and where things, really, we get those downloads, you get that clarity, you're like, I get that knowing, and it's really coming from that place. And that's, you're like, this is really like who I am. And I think part of, the healing journey that we're all on, and like finding our purpose, is like first finding that place, right? Because from that place, so that's like our internal purpose. Our internal purpose is, how can I get back to my true self, which is really in the being, getting into presence. Because a lot of us have a dysfunctional relationship with the present. And that's what I realized in my stories. I had a dysfunctional relationship with the present moment. I looked at the present moment as a means to an end, or something I had to get to the end of, right? And that's doing right. I need to get to here and I need to get to here and I need to delay gratification. And I'm never really here. I'm always there, which there never actually comes, right? In a lot of ways. And so that internal first step is like getting to that place in ourself, which then makes way for our external purpose, which is where you're like, I want to be a coach. This is what I want to do. And healing really begins to come full circle when you're like, okay, I'm taking what I've walked through, I'm taking my own healing and I'm turning that outward. And now I want to help other people. And I think that's how people actually become the most fulfilled in their life, is by doing exactly what you do. And that's even what I help women with now. And like coaching, business coaching is like taking their own story and then creating their business, their purpose from their own story. And that's, like you said, it even helps your own healing along the way.
Yes. Yeah, 1,000%. And I mean, for me, I had a lot of resistance actually in the beginning when I first started, when I first went back to, or when I first started the coaching, not coaching, when I first got into the, my program, before I even started coaching, I was like, oh, I'm just going to help. I thought it was like, oh, I'm going to be a life coach. Like, I'm just going to help like busy moms, like just, just get their life together. Basically, like I didn't know what I was doing, but I can tell you, I had so much resistance to even doing anything in the fitness, in the weight loss space, like any of it, because of my own shit, because of like, I was like, oh my gosh, there's no way I'm doing that, because then all eyes are going to be on me, the pressure for me to have the perfect body, for me to like always be on display. Like there's no way I don't want to do that. And I'll never forget, I first started off with that and I wasn't getting any traction in my business. And I had a business coach and I was about 5 months into it and I literally had no clients. I was like 5 months in, I had no clients. And I never forget, my business coach said, what do people come to you for? Like, seriously, like your friends, like your family, like, what do people come to you for? I'm like, they come to me for like health and wellness stuff. And, how do they, and fitness. And they come to me for like, nutrition advice and all of that. And she was like, why aren't you doing that? And I went through my whole thing of why. And she's like, nope, you need to let that story go. And sure enough, a month later, when I decided I was really going to be brave and go in on this niche, my business exploded. And it was just wild to me. And from there, though, I realized that there was such a dire need for women over 40 to really heal their relationship with food, to stop the dieting, to create that healthy lifestyle that really works for them, to stop feeling so miserable, every time they look in the mirror, and really catering to this group of women whose body are changing, women over 40. A lot of us have had children, a lot of us, our hormones are shifting. So many of the times we feel like our body's been friggin' hijacked. And there's just a whole, very, big population of women who need support. And so this is, I say, kind of my niche found me, I think, but I don't know.
So many of you guys know my story of losing my health, dealing with hormonal imbalances, thyroid issues, depression, anxiety, and gut issues that were so severe. I almost had my entire large intestine removed, and Western medicine completely failed me. They gave me trash can diagnosis like IBS, depression, gave me a bunch of medications. And, if I wouldn't have taken my health in my own hands today, I would be without an entire organ, like literally. And that's why I created what I wish I had, what I needed, a holistic mind and body approach, a functional medicine approach that said, why do we have this problem in the first place? And what can we do to restore function? This is the difference between thriving instead of just surviving and managing your symptoms. So if you're somebody who is sick and tired of being sick and tired, dealing with stubborn gut issues or hormonal imbalances or weight loss that you feel like is not moving anywhere, or thyroid issues and autoimmune condition, there is hope. There is another approach. And me and my team of registered dietitians, we want to help you. We want to be the support there for you. We want to do the functional medicine lab testing, look at your gut, your hormones, your thyroid, your adrenals, deficiencies, toxins that you can have in your body, get to know what you're doing with your nutrition, look at your lifestyle, look at your previous medical history, and help you create a customized plan to not just only heal, but get to the best health of your entire life. So if you're somebody who's ready to take a root cause approach to healing and step into the best version of you, fill out our application on our website, rachelscheer.com, and book a free 30-minute call. Absolutely free to do this call. Our goal on this call is to better get to know your goals and how this approach may work for you. So click the link in the show notes and book a free call if you would like to learn more.
Yeah. How do you help women, kind of switching gears here, transition from a diet to a healthy lifestyle? And then what do you feel like is the difference between a diet and a healthy lifestyle? Maybe we start there first.
Yeah. I would say the biggest difference is that diets really are kind of a one size fit all, right? We all know it's like a one size fit all with all these food rules and restrictions. And at the end of the day, they really aren't sustainable for anybody. Diets aren't meant to be long term. It is not a long term solution. It is a quick fix. That is what diets are supposed to do. This is how, the diet industry makes billions and billions of dollars. They come up with new quick fixes all the time. But the problem with diets is that they teach us to go right for the nutrition. They teach us to go right for the exercise. And most of us, because we have, we have enough willpower, we can get through any kind of short diet, right? Or we can get through we can white knuckle it. We can willpower our way through it. But what happens when the diet ends, right? What happens with the diet ends? Well, for most of us, we go back to our real life, maybe not right out the gates, right? But eventually we can fall back into old patterns, old thought beliefs, old habits, and what happens is the weight comes back. And it's because diets teach us nothing about building a foundation that is actually not only realistic for your life, right? Meaning realistic for the your job and your family and how you operate on the daily, right? But also diets don't teach us how to live a lifestyle that's in alignment with the life you want to live. And what I mean by that, a perfect example that I like to give with this is that, how many of you listening have been had the goal that you want to get up at 5:00 in the morning to go work out, right? And then how many people actually hit that? It's typically a very small part of the population that really actually follows through with that. And so much of the time, it's because it can be a couple different things. Maybe your nighttime routine isn't supporting that, right? And so instead of trying to wake up at 5:00 in the morning, maybe try to get to bed earlier, and then that will support you getting up earlier. But for a lot of times, and this was the case of the client that I was actually just coaching last week, she kept setting this goal of wanting to get up at 5 a.m. to go work out. She kept missing it over and over again. And every time she missed it, she's getting frustrated. And I finally said to her, I said, why aren't you getting to bed at 5:00? And she's like, well, what happens is that, my daughter comes home from dance and this is our only time to connect. And I said, and she said, and that's really important to me. And I said, so what you're saying is that connection time with your daughter is important to who you are, right? You want to be a good mom, right? And then that to you defines a good mom, that connection time with your daughter. And I said, so why not just be okay with saying, you know what, getting up at 5 a.m. doesn't support me being able to stay up and have that connection time with my daughter. And that's in alignment with the kind of mom I want to be and the kind of person I want to be. So I'm going to let that go. I'm going to let that go. I'm going to stop trying to do that. Right. And diets don't teach any of that. There's no individual approach to any of that, which is why people cannot stay consistent with diets. And so I think that is the difference with a healthy lifestyle. Well, one of the other things I'll say is diets require perfection. Diets require perfection, right? Diets, it totally promotes this all or nothing mentality for people, right? Because there's no other way, right? When you're trying to lose, 10 pounds or, 15 pounds in 8 weeks, there's no room for error. So you better damn well be counting every single macro or hitting every single calorie or, cutting out all sugar, all alcohol. There's no room for anything else. And when you talk about a lifestyle, the difference is that there is room for it doesn't require perfection. A healthy lifestyle is about being consistent most of the time over time with those big dial movers, right? And it's about finding that lifestyle that actually works for you, because at the end of the day, you can fight it as much as you want. At the end of the day, that's what you're going to stick to, is what actually works for you. And so I teach my clients, how do you find that balance, right? Giving yourself permission to, giving yourself permission to recognize what works for you, and then finding how do you turn that into a healthier lifestyle, right? So going back to that question you asked of like, how do you help clients like kind of transition from like diets to building a sustainable lifestyle? The first thing I do, and I do this in all my programs, is really before we even get into any kind of nutrition and hormones and like all the nuts and bolts that I teach as well, let's get crystal clear on what works for you. Let's get crystal clear on the lifestyle that you want to live. What does a perfect day look like for you? What is your routine? What feels good for you, right? Like, let's talk about that. Not what Susie, the influencer, is doing, not what Amber's doing, not what Rachel's doing. Like, what works for you? Like, let's figure that out. The second thing that I help women transition from diet to sustainable, healthy living is really just freaking bringing it back to basics, right? Like, nutrition doesn't have to be complicated. We make it complicated. Diet culture makes it complicated. It really is about just really leaning into a more whole food, colorful, balanced diet, minimizing stuff in a box or a package, and just really, again, just really kind of leaning into a more simplified nutrition. That's not sexy, but it is true. It is true. Yeah. So bringing it back to basics. And then the last thing I would say that I do is I really work with clients to heal that diet mentality. One of the biggest things that keeps people, I think women in particular, falling like on and off the wagon, right? You hear that phrase all the time. I'm falling off the wagon. I got to start over on Monday, right? Or it really is because it's like such a deep disconnect especially for women who have been chronically dieting their whole life. There's such a deep disconnect with their bodies, right? There's such a deep disconnect with simple biofeedback like hunger and cravings, right? We've developed such a poor relationship with food that we've got the good food list and the bad food list. And, as anytime you operate from that mindset of like, oh, this food's good and this food's bad, all that does is perpetuate binge mentality. All that does is you can white knuckle it through anything, fight cravings like, oh, I want that cookie. And that natural ping pong effect happens. I want that cookie. You shouldn't have that cookie, but I want it, but I shouldn't have it. And that may work for a little while, right? Like that is a strategy where you can avoid the cookie for a little while, but eventually what happens, right? Well, eventually you want it, and you give in and you maybe have 5 cookies. And then you think to yourself, or maybe you have the 1 cookie and you think, I've already been bad, so I might as well keep being bad. I'm just going to eat 5 and I'll start over tomorrow. I know there's so many women listening and be like, yep. Because that was my whole life. Like that was my whole life. Right. And so it's really, really important to start to heal your relationship with food and start to, I always talk about, it's like the power of permission. I tell women all the time, like, you're a grown ass woman. You actually can eat whatever you want, right? So stop operating from this place of I can or I can't eat it. Girl, take your power back. You can eat whatever you want. Start operating from lifestyle 2.0, which is I can have whatever I want, but I'm going to choose this. And when you can operate from that place in your brain, it takes you out of the primal like monkey brain, which is like, I can't, and moves you into a more rational part of your brain, which is like, you know what? I could have this if I want, but let me get curious with myself. Do I want the cookie or is there maybe a healthier alternative? Or you know what? I'm going to have the cookie, but I'm not being bad because it's not bad if I have a cookie, and I'm going to mindfully enjoy it. And if I want another one, no judgment, right? But maybe I will, maybe I won't. And I see this all the time in my practice, which I'm sure you have with your coaching nutrition too. It's like when you could just give yourself permission, you would be shocked at the way that you respond. And you have the cookie and then you're good, right? Or you have a couple bites and you're good. But we as humans, like when we're told we can't have something, like we just want it, right?
We're like little kids for sure.
Yeah.
You say, I can't. And that's why I even think like the language we use in our head and with ourselves, because most of us aren't speaking this out loud, right? We're not like, I can't, it's in our head. It's the conversations we're having with ourselves. And we're like, I can't have that cookie. Now, it's very different for one person to be like, I can't have this cookie. And then they really actually want the cookie. And this is the whole inner dialogue that they're having versus someone else who's like, you know what? I really don't want the cookie. Like, I really don't want the cookie. Like, I could have it if I wanted it, but I don't really want the cookie.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the thing is that when you're stuck in that I can't have, though, you don't even create the space. That's why I talk about kind of the monkey brain versus the rational brain. You don't even create the space. Like you don't even switch to that part of your brain of like, I can have the cookie if I want it, but I actually don't, because it's like your brain doesn't even allow you to get there because you're just so stuck in the like, I can't. And it's like, it becomes like a, you know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah.
And from even working with some of my own coaches, there's something one of my coaches said to me once, and it's whatever you resist persists. Yes. So when you're resisting something so much, like you have that, I can't, or like you said, lifestyle doesn't require perfection. When you're requiring perfection in order for something to work, it's gonna create some kind of a resistance, no matter what. Like lifestyle is like that being like, you're just in it, you're living it, versus, the diet that requires perfection is something that you're doing, right? Yes. It's something that you're doing, which there's a means to an end. And then there's you failed or you didn't fail, or you did good, or you didn't live up to it ultimately, and no one's going to be able to stick with that forever. So there's going to be that inevitable part where you're like, I didn't stick with it. This diet doesn't work for me.
Yes.
So I love that you said, it doesn't require perfection overall. And something else I think that was really key too is, asking people what their perfect day is. So a lot of people don't think about that. Like, what is my perfect day? When do I actually want to wake up in the morning? That is conductive. It also has to be conductive, like with your goals too. Like,
sure.
Like what does your perfect day look like, and create that, and then, align all of this that you're desiring for ultimately with it. But if you create a goal based off of how you think it should be, and it doesn't align with what you actually want for your life, I think that's what a lot of people do. So I thought that was a very powerful piece that you also put in there. I just wanted to highlight for everybody. A question I do have though. So let's say you're with a client who they don't like healthy food, right? I'm gonna throw a curveball at you, but I'm sure you've gotten this before. Because I get these people, right, where it's like lifestyle, not diet, but they're like, I don't like any of those foods. I don't want any of those foods. I don't like it, right? And it's this dysfunctional relationship now with actually real whole food and a desire only for the hyper palatable processed food. How does someone begin to heal that relationship?
Well, I think there's, obviously it's specific on kind of like what they have been, eating a lot of, but I will say, one of the first things is that I do start to reduce sugar in people's nutrition. Now, I don't restrict out at all, but I think that I never ask people to cut out. What I ask people to do is to start moving more things in to try to push some things out. But, one of the ways that I help women with this is to really just take a look at, like, get an honest assessment of like, what are you eating, right? Like, what are you eating? Now, I'm not like in a day, and I'm not saying you have to track it in MyFitnessPal or anything like that. Like, literally just write it down. Let's talk about it. Right. And then let's like move through your day and let's figure out why. Why are you, really why? Because what I'll say is that I agree. Like, I think once it is like with sugar and those processed foods, like if you start to get to taste for that, sugar just feeds the beast, right? You know as well as I do, when you start to titrate sugar out of your diet, you will start to crave it less, right? But it takes a minute to get there, right? So it's kind of like a two-part thing, right? The ultimate goal is that I'm trying to reduce some of those foods out of their diet. But I want to look at it a little bit more holistically. So first of all, I am wanting to know like exactly kind of like what is going on there. But then I really want them to dive into like, why are they eating those foods? Why is it that they're going through the drive-through, right? Because 9 times out of 10, people know that they need to eat healthier. And so they may be like, I just don't want any of those healthy foods now because I've been like, that doesn't taste good to me. And I was like, okay, well, it might not taste good to you because you've gone a long time now and you've like totally worked it out of your diet, right? So let's talk about the why. And a lot of times what I find is that why people kind of fall into that trap, right? And why it becomes a pattern for them, why they're eating so much of that food all the time. It's out of convenience. It's out of lack of preparation, right? They're not prioritizing their nutrition. You know, one of the things I hear from so many women is like, I prioritize everything else in my life, but I just don't really prioritize my nutrition. I don't plan it. I don't plan for it. Right. And so I think it is a matter of finding ways like to start to work out slowly some of that stuff by maybe working in some things. And when it comes to working in, what I find a lot of times too is when somebody tells me I don't like vegetables, I'll be like, oh, really? Like, why? You know, what kind of vegetables are you eating? Well, you know, just like plain broccoli is just gross to me. I'm like, yeah, girl, plain broccoli is gross to me too. Like, how are we preparing it? That's another reason why I find so many people really are like struggling with healthy foods is because they think that healthy foods have to take a long time, you know, or maybe they're gross, right? But really, there is so many ways to make healthy foods fast, easy, and delicious, right? And so I think if you're somebody who's listening is like, yeah, I don't like vegetables. Well, I would dare to say it's because you're preparing them like crap. Like they're like, you're not saying you're not like, it's the way that you're preparing them, right? And so get creative with it, or maybe just start with like the one vegetable, you know, you like, and like explore different ways, you know, cook in the air fryer, roast it, like, you know, find different ways to make it, right? But I think it's a little bit of both. It's like figuring out why are you eating that kind of food? And then how can we start to make the healthier foods taste better?
Yeah. Finding the why, getting to the root cause. Cause I agree with you. Typically, most of the time it's, I'm way too busy. I'm on the go. Let me stop by and get this fast food. I didn't prepare.
Yes.
You know, or emotional reasons too, quite a bit. We have a ton of stress in our life. And then, you know, that's the time when I find myself heading for all the chocolate. You know, I'm like, chocolate in my fridge, even though it's healthy chocolate. All of a sudden I'm like, I already had 2 pieces. Why am I continuously wanting to like eat this? You know, and I realize it's because I'm like, oh, I feel a little bit stressed. This is me just like how I'm like coping right now. And like, we eat based off of emotions too. So I think identifying those reasons are super important there overall. And then I like that you talk about more so the addition method versus like pull out. Yeah. And I would even imagine too, you know, for a lot of women, because we're speaking mainly to women, and I know this does pertain to men too. So guys, if you're listening, this still does apply to you. We just connect more with women on this, and women struggle a lot more with their relationship with food and body image. Not to say that men don't at all. But I'd also kind of question what this person who, let's say, who's struggling to eat the healthier foods and veggies, you know, is having a visual of their mind of as a healthy meal, right? Yes. Because they're probably picturing in their mind, like, that means like the standard bodybuilder chicken, broccoli, and that's it. And like, that's it. Like a very gross, like broiled broccoli and like these steamed broccoli to go along with it. And they're just like, man, this doesn't sound appealing. Like, and you have to be able to enjoy your food. And I think why, even like for me, and when people make this a sustainable lifestyle, like I tracked macros for a long time, very dysfunctional relationship with food. Everybody who listens to my podcast knows my story of what led with all of my health issues. But now I don't track macros. I don't track calories. I very easily can maintain my body composition in my lifestyle from all of this too. But I enjoy what I eat. I truly enjoy what I eat. It's not restrictive to me. If I want to try a little piece of cookie, I do, but I also enjoy feeling good, like, cause I've had gut issues. So I'm like, I'm good. I don't need it most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time. But I enjoy the food I'm eating. I'm like, give me a steak, give me a badass steak. Yes. A filet, give me some roasted air fried sweet potatoes, give me, you know, a good side salad. I like arugula, avocado on it. And I'm like, I'm a happy girl. I will eat that.
And that's good. Yeah. And that's delicious. Like that's me. I'm like getting hungry. I'm like, yeah, that's delicious.
Yeah. And I think people, it's figuring out the foods that they enjoy too. And it is unfortunate that so many people have lost sight of that, of food that is good, real whole food that they enjoy. And most people, and I give that meal example because I give that meal example a lot, but I'm like, do you like steak? And they're like, yeah, I like steak. And I'm like, okay, let's cook an awesome steak, grill it up. You know, let's cook some like air fried sweet. I literally give them that exact meal. And I'm like, does that sound good to you? And they're like, yeah, that sounds good. And I was like, okay, that's what I'm trying to tell you like to eat. You know, like let's cook those kind of foods. So I just was thinking about, as you're talking about, probably what this person is also have an example of is also like healthy eating. And it's probably
Sure.
not true.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, I had that conversation with a client the other day and she was like, well, yeah, she's like, I just don't really like to eat healthy. And I was like, well, she's like, all right, I just struggle to stay consistent with healthy eating. And I was like, well, what is healthy eating? She's like, like chicken and broccoli. And I was like, that's like, yeah, I would struggle to stay consistent with chicken and broccoli too. Like gross. And like cans of tuna fish. No freaking thank you. Like, I'm not like, I'm like, I can't even tell you in my 20s how many times I would just eat raw tuna fish out of the can. Like never again. No, never again. Doesn't have to be like that.
So when it comes to weight loss, right? Because I'm sure you work with a lot of ladies who want to lose weight. They're like, I'm upset that I have this fat around my midsection. I don't feel good about my body. Help me lose weight. Help me lose this weight as fast as possible. I'm sure you've heard that before. Help me get this off. I have this trip coming up. I have this. And then they also like don't want to diet. What's the best step for this person?
Well, first of all, I'll just be transparent. If someone comes to me and says, I got this trip coming up and I need to lose weight, I'm like, I'm not your coach. So I love it. Yeah. Like, I'm like, that's not for me. That's not who I coach. Now I am all about women setting goals and having milestones and all of this, but if somebody comes to me with an unrealistic expectation, I first try and manage their expectations of what's a healthy and safe way to lose the weight. But if they are, they're definitely wanting to lose it quickly, that is not the client for me for sure. So I think but I do think that women still, even if they do end up working with me and they see that like, okay, I'm right. Like they know that losing 20 pounds before this beach trip is not right. Really where I start with like, where I start with clients is really kind of from that, like that holistic lifestyle approach. Like before we even talk about nutrition, I want to know how much they're sleeping. Like straight up. I want to know how much are you sleeping? Because as you know, like sleep is king, right? Like sleep is really like the baseline of like, we need to be getting good sleep. It affects us hormonally. I mean, just all of it, as you know. And so, I always have women start with like, let's start with sleep. Let's start with a move goal, right? Let's start with a move goal. And so maybe it's just getting your steps in. Like, let's create the habit of moving your body. And then I really want to have women start just being mindful of how much stuff they're eating in a box or a package. And it's just crazy when you can start to like really just lean into those three simple things. You will start to notice that maybe you are, your body, you are sleeping better. Your energy is more stable. Your cravings are low. And all of those are not in a vacuum. All of those relate to your ability to lose weight and also just the choices you make during the day, right? Like how many times I know for me, when I'm tired, I am like a bottomless pit the next day. I know now
everything's out the window.
Yes. Well, and I know now why that is hormonally, my ghrelins up, my leptin's low, my cortisol's high. Like I know all of that from that standpoint, but I know that I just make typically terrible choices when I'm exhausted. Right. And so you will notice that you have a little bit more control over your nutrition when you focus on sleeping. So I think I usually like to start clients off just on very key foundational lifestyles. What I'm talking about, like healthy habits for lifestyle. That's the thing with going back to that question about difference between a diet and a lifestyle, right? Like, with a lifestyle, it's all these little things that add up, like getting the reps in, all these little things, like your lifestyle, as a whole, your life as a whole, they all add up. And eventually that will get you to the outcome of what you're looking for is the weight loss, right? But we got to focus on the process first. We got to focus on those habits.
I love that you're talking about sleep and getting down to the routine stuff. Cause I think everyone does jump to what diet, going back to the diet piece, what do I need to do to lose the weight? But also typically why we're making poor food choices, or we're not really eating the real whole foods is because of all of these other things that are happening in our life. Crazy busy, not getting enough sleep, we're stressed out all the time. And when we can fix those, I think a lot of women would be surprised of like, wow, I have a lot more, I don't know if self-control is the right word that you would use, but I have a lot more just groundedness to be able to choose what I actually feel like I want to in the moment versus letting my hormones and everything else influence me of what I, think I want. And then this whole inner game back and forth.
Oh, absolutely. I can tell you one of the first things I have my clients do. In fact, a gift when somebody signs up to my program is I send them the 5-minute journal, right? And I also encourage them to buy a planner before we even talk about food. Because here's the deal: if you are unorganized and stressed and out of touch with yourself, which so many women are, you're never going to be able to get your nutrition and your exercise in line, because all of that stuff matters. Like, all of that affects your ability to make choices and empower you to make good choices when it comes to your nutrition and fitness. And in fact, when we are disorganized, when we are stressed, when we aren't sleeping, what's the first to go? The first to go is our workout. Oh, I'm too tired. I can't work out today. Or, oh, I didn't have time to go to the store today because I was unorganized. So I had to stop and get fast food. Right. So stop putting the cart before the horse. Like, get your life in order, right? Like, practice some stress mitigation. Then let's talk about some food. Right.
Yeah. And I would even bring back in your part on figuring out your perfect day, because I would imagine these people aren't living their perfect day. And it's like, how can we get as close to this as possible? I think whether you're somebody who has, a struggling with a relationship with food, you're someone who's wanting to build a business, like everybody, you should create your perfect day and see what that looks like. Try to create a perfect week. What would that look like on your schedule? What would you be doing? Because this is your life. Like, let's try to create everything else around what your perfect life is ultimately gonna look like. So I love that you focus more on the lifestyle instead of just, diving immediately into the nutrition, because that does influence all of that so much there.
Yeah. And I would say too, when you're looking at your perfect day, one of the questions I have my clients ask after they map out their perfect day is to sit and reflect then and ask yourself the question: who or what is preventing me from making this my perfect day? Like, what do I need to let go of?
And normally we're like me, right? Always going back. I love this. Where can people find more about your approach and what you're doing? Because this podcast has been incredibly helpful. If you guys do not go check out her page, y'all need to. Her podcast. She has a podcast. I just went on her podcast. You need to listen to that one. She's on social media, and I just love everything that you're about.
You are so sweet. I feel the same about you, girl. So listen, I am on all the social media platforms. I'm on TikTok and Instagram. My jam is Instagram, though, just because I feel I love the DM aspect of it. So I am always in there. I would love for you to reach out, send me a message. You can find me at Miss Amber Shaw, and that's just MS Amber Shaw. That's on Instagram and TikTok. And then, hop over to the Wellness Revolution podcast. That is my podcast. You're going to want to follow it anyways, because Rachel's going to be on there. So that you get notified for that. But I would love to hear from you.
Awesome. And people can check out your website if they're interested in working with you.
Yeah. ambershaw.com. Yep.
All right, guys, check out ambershaw.com. We'll put all of that in the show notes with all of her links to her social media, slide in her DM. This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast today.
Oh my gosh, this was the best. Thanks for having me.
And everybody, you know the drill. If you got value out of today's podcast, please do me a favor, take a screenshot. Take a screenshot of you listening on iTunes, Spotify. If you're listening on YouTube, that's awesome. Share it in your Instagram stories. Tag Amber, tag me, my personal page, and the Scheer Madness Podcast. We love to hear from you. We'll reshare it on our stories. And this has been Scheer Madness.